3 weeks ago, I buried my sister Dahlia after she was found dead in a hospital parking lot, clutching an old military jacket that made absolutely no sense. The police wrote it off as a robbery gone wrong, case closed, move on with your life. But I couldn't let it go. Something about that jacket felt important, like Dahlia was trying to tell me something even in death. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. I decided to do the right thing and return what I assumed was stolen military property to the Veterans Affairs office downtown. I walked in thinking I'd hand over the jacket, maybe get some closure about my sister's final moments, and finally start healing. Instead, I watched a decorated military commander examine that worn fabric, touch a small patch on the sleeve, and then do something that changed everything I thought I knew about how my sister died. His face drained of all color. His hands actually trembled as he stepped back from the jacket. And then this hardened military officer, this man who'd probably seen combat and commanded troops, stood at perfect attention and gave that old jacket the most respectful, solemn salute I'd ever witnessed. I'm telling you this story because what happened next shattered every assumption I had about my sister's death, about the kind of person she was, and about how far some people will go to silence the truth. My sister Dahlia wasn't just a night shift nurse at Metro General Hospital. She wasn't just the victim of random violence. She died protecting a secret that powerful people were willing to kill for. And the proof was hidden in plain sight on that military jacket the entire time. If you've ever lost someone and felt like the official story didn't add up, if you've ever wondered whether ordinary people can become heroes without anyone knowing, then you need to hear what I discovered about my sister's final act of courage. Because sometimes the people we think we know best are carrying secrets that could change everything. The July heat was already shimmering off the cracked sidewalks when I pulled into my grandmother Celeste's driveway in Millfield, Nebraska. My Honda Civic, loaded with everything I owned after 4 years of college, looked out of place next to her pristine 1987 Buick that barely had 30,000 miles on it. She'd probably driven it to the grocery store once a week for the past 20 years and nowhere else. I hadn't been home for more than a quick Christmas visit in 3 years. And I felt that familiar pang of guilt as I noticed how the paint was peeling on her front porch railings. The garden gnomes she'd collected since I was little still stood guard by her rose bushes, but even they looked weathered and forgotten. Celeste appeared at the front door before I could even grab my first suitcase. She was wearing that jacket. The same olive green military-style jacket she'd worn every single day for as long as I could remember. In July, in Nebraska, where it was already pushing 90 degrees at 10 in the morning. "Riley, sweetheart," she called out, her voice carrying that same gentle rasp it always had. "You made good time from Lincoln." I hugged her carefully, feeling how much smaller she seemed than when I was 18 and leaving for college. But that jacket felt exactly the same. Thick, sturdy canvas that smelled faintly of lavender soap and something else I could never identify. Something that reminded me of old books and distant places. "Grandma, aren't you hot in that jacket?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. Her hands immediately went to the zipper, a defensive gesture I'd seen 1,000 times before. "I'm fine, dear, just fine. Come on, let's get you settled." This was vintage Celeste. Deflect, redirect, avoid. My mother, Vivian, had warned me about pushing too hard on certain topics, but after 4 years of psychology classes, I thought I understood people better now. I thought I could help. The inside of her house looked exactly like it had when I was 12. Same floral wallpaper, same crocheted doilies on every surface, same collection of ceramic angels on the mantel. But what struck me most was what wasn't there. No photographs. No family pictures, no vacation snapshots, no memories displayed anywhere. Most grandmothers' houses were museums of family history. Celeste's house was like a hotel room where someone had been living for decades, but never really moved in. "I made up the guest room for you," she said, leading me upstairs. "Fresh sheets and everything. I know it's not fancy like what you're used to now." "It's perfect, Grandma. Really." I set down my suitcase and turned to face her. The afternoon light coming through the bedroom window highlighted every line in her face, every silver strand in her still thick hair. At 78, she was beautiful in that weathered way that spoke of strength and endurance. But those eyes held secrets that seemed to weigh her down. "I thought maybe this summer we could spend some real time together," I said. "Get to know each other better. I feel like I never really knew you growing up." Something flickered across her face. Fear maybe, or sadness. Her hands went to that jacket again, smoothing down the worn fabric near the left shoulder where there was a small patch I'd never paid attention to before. "There's not much to know, sweetheart. I'm just an old woman who likes her routines," but that wasn't true, and we both knew it. Celeste Morrison was the woman the entire town whispered about. The woman who'd appeared in Millfield sometime in the 70s with no family, no history, no explanation. She'd bought the little house on Elm Street with cash, got a job at the phone company, and kept to herself for 50 years. Crazy old Celeste. I'd heard kids at school call her when I was younger. It used to make me so angry, but I could never defend her properly because I didn't understand her myself. Why did she wear that jacket every single day? Why didn't she have any friends? Why did she flinch whenever someone asked about her past? My mother had tried to explain it once. "Your grandmother has been through things, Riley, hard things." That jacket means something to her that we don't understand. But it's not our place to judge. Except now I was 24 with a degree in education and child psychology. I'd studied trauma and coping mechanisms. I'd written papers on how people use physical objects to anchor themselves to painful memories. That jacket wasn't helping my grandmother heal. It was keeping her trapped in whatever had happened to her decades ago. Standing in that guest bedroom, watching her adjust the sleeves of that same green jacket she'd probably put on before dawn, I made a decision. This summer was going to be different. I was going to help Celeste let go of whatever was holding her back. I was going to help her move forward. I had no idea I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The first week at Celeste's house passed quietly, but I was watching. Every morning at exactly 6:15, she'd emerge from her bedroom already wearing that jacket, buttoned up despite the summer heat. She'd make coffee, water her roses, and sit on the front porch for exactly 30 minutes before starting her day. The jacket never came off. By the second week, I decided to test the waters gently. We were having breakfast when I casually mentioned how nice it would be to go shopping together. "Maybe we could find you some pretty summer blouses," I suggested, trying to keep my voice light. "Something cool and comfortable for these hot days." Celeste's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Her free hand instinctively went to the jacket's zipper. "I have everything I need, dear." "But Grandma, it's 95 degrees outside." "That jacket must be so uncomfortable." "I'm perfectly comfortable." Her tone had shifted, becoming clipped and defensive. "I've been wearing this jacket for longer than you've been alive, Riley. I think I know what works for me." The conversation ended there, but I couldn't let it go. Over the next few days, I tried different approaches. I mentioned how stylish older women looked in the magazines. I pointed out other women her age in town who dressed beautifully. I even suggested that maybe the jacket needed some repairs, thinking I could get her to take it off long enough to fix whatever was wrong with it. Each time, the result was the same. Celeste would shut down, her shoulders would tense, and she'd find some excuse to leave the room. The more I pushed, the more guarded she became. 3 weeks into my stay, I was getting frustrated. This wasn't helping anyone. My grandmother was clearly stuck in some kind of trauma response, and that jacket was the physical manifestation of whatever she couldn't let go of. As someone who'd studied psychology, I knew that sometimes people needed a gentle push to move past their coping mechanisms. The breaking point came on a particularly sweltering Tuesday morning. We were sitting on the front porch, and I watched sweat bead on Celeste's forehead as she stubbornly kept that jacket zipped up tight. "Grandma, please," I said, unable to hide my exasperation anymore. "You're going to make yourself sick. It's too hot for that jacket." "Riley, stop!" Her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. "This jacket stays with me." End of discussion. But why? What's so special about an old military surplus jacket that you'd risk heat stroke for it? The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line. Celeste went completely still, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. When she looked at me, her eyes held a pain so deep it made my chest ache. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You couldn't possibly understand." "Then help me understand." "I'm trying to help you, but you won't let me in. You won't talk about your past. You won't take off that jacket. You won't let anyone get close to you. How is that living?" Tears started forming in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "This jacket stays with me, Riley. It has to." That night, I lay in bed thinking about everything my psychology professors had taught me about interventions. Sometimes, they'd said, people needed their safety nets removed before they could learn to function without them. Sometimes you had to create a crisis to facilitate healing. It was a terrible idea, but I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. The next morning, I suggested we go to Mabel's diner for breakfast. Celeste loved their blueberry pancakes, and I thought a public setting might make what I was planning less traumatic. We settled into our usual booth by the window, the same one we'd sat in during every visit to Mabel's since I was a child. I waited until Celeste was distracted, reading the menu she'd memorized years ago. Then I accidentally knocked over my full cup of coffee. The dark liquid splashed across the table and soaked directly into the left side of her jacket, right over that mysterious patch I'd never been able to see clearly. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Celeste let out a sound I'd never heard before, something between a gasp and a cry of physical pain. Her hands flew to the wet fabric, pressing against it like she was trying to stop bleeding from a wound. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Riley, what have you done?" She started crying then, not the gentle tears of an elderly woman, but the raw, heartbroken sobs of someone whose world had just collapsed. Her whole body shook as she clutched the stained jacket to her chest. The entire diner had gone quiet. Other customers were staring, but I couldn't focus on anything except the devastation on my grandmother's face. This wasn't the gentle push toward healing I'd imagined. This was cruelty disguised as help. "Grandma, I'm so sorry," I stammered. "I thought if you had to take it off to clean it, maybe you'd realize you could live without it. I was trying to help." Through her tears, she looked at me with a mixture of betrayal and profound sadness that cut straight through my heart. "This jacket," she said, her voice barely audible, "is all I have left of the most important part of my life. And you just tried to take it away from me." I realized then that I didn't know my grandmother at all, and I had just made the worst mistake of my life. The ride home from Mabel's diner was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Celeste sat in the passenger seat clutching her coffee-stained jacket, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. I kept stealing glances at her, wanting desperately to apologize again, but knowing that words wouldn't fix what I'd broken. When we got to the house, she went straight to her room and closed the door. I heard the lock click and then nothing. No movement, no sounds. Just the terrible quiet of someone trying to hold themselves together behind a thin wooden barrier. I spent the rest of that day pacing the living room, replaying the devastation on her face over and over again. Every psychology textbook I'd ever read suddenly felt worthless. All those theories about intervention and therapeutic breakthroughs seemed like academic garbage when faced with the reality of my grandmother's pain. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I knocked softly on her bedroom door. "Grandma, I brought you some tea." "I'm not hungry, dear. Thank you anyway." Her voice sounded hollow, defeated. I pressed my forehead against the door, fighting back my own tears. "I'm so sorry. I know saying it doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know I never meant to hurt you." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I know you didn't, Riley, but that doesn't change what happened. That night I made a decision. I was going to fix this whatever it took. Not by forcing her to let go of the jacket, but by understanding why she needed to hold on to it so tightly. The next morning, while Celeste was still in her room, I drove to Henderson's military surplus store on the outskirts of town. The owner, Frank Henderson, had been running the place since before I was born. If anyone could tell me about military jackets, it would be him. The bell jangled as I entered, and Frank looked up from behind the counter. He was probably 70 himself, with graying hair and arms covered in faded tattoos. "You're Celeste Morrison's granddaughter," he said. It wasn't a question. In a town like Millfield, everyone knew everyone's family connections. "Yes, sir. I need your help with something." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd secretly taken of the jacket over the years. "Can you tell me anything about this jacket?" Frank adjusted his reading glasses and studied the images carefully. His expression grew more serious as he zoomed in on specific details. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "This isn't just any military jacket. This is Vietnam era, probably late 60s, early 70s. He pointed to a barely visible patch on the sleeve. See this? That's a medical corps insignia, and this wear pattern here around the pockets and cuffs that's consistent with field use. Heavy field use. My heart started beating faster. Field use? Combat zones, miss. This jacket saw action. Real action. Frank's voice had taken on a respectful tone. And judging by the specific wear patterns and these particular patches, this belonged to someone who was right in the thick of things. Medics in Vietnam, especially ones who got this close to combat, they were heroes. Every single one of them. I stared at the photos with new eyes. Are you saying my grandmother was in Vietnam? Frank handed my phone back. I'm saying that jacket tells a story of service and sacrifice. And if it belonged to your grandmother, then she's got one hell of a story to tell. I left Henderson's with my mind reeling. Celeste, my quiet, mysterious grandmother who never talked about her past, had been a combat medic in Vietnam. The jacket wasn't a security blanket or a trauma response. It was a uniform. It was proof of service that no one had ever acknowledged. My next stop was the Millfield Public Library. I spent hours researching everything I could find about women in the Vietnam War, particularly female medics. What I discovered made my chest tight with anger and sadness. Most female veterans of Vietnam had their service minimized or ignored entirely. They'd come home to a country that didn't want to hear about the war, especially from women who'd served in combat roles that officially didn't exist. Many of them had never received proper recognition for their service. Many of them had never even told their families what they'd done. I understood now why Celeste had never talked about it. In 1975, when she'd arrived in Millfield, the world wasn't ready to hear about female combat medics who'd saved lives under enemy fire. So she'd stayed quiet, keeping her service private, wearing her uniform jacket as the only acknowledgement she allowed herself. But that stained jacket was sitting in her room right now, and she was probably convinced it was ruined forever. I had to fix this, not just the coffee stains, but everything. I had to find a way to give her back what I'd taken away, and maybe, if I was lucky, help her understand that her story deserved to be told. I drove to the next town over and found a dry cleaner who specialized in vintage military uniforms. When I explained the situation, the elderly Vietnamese woman behind the counter nodded solemnly. "This is someone's honor," she said simply. "We'll make it perfect again." Now I just had to figure out how to give my grandmother back her dignity along with her jacket. 3 days later, I picked up the restored jacket from the dry cleaner. It looked amazing. The coffee stains were completely gone, and they'd even managed to brighten the faded areas without damaging the original patches. The Vietnamese woman had treated it like a sacred artifact, pressing it with care and wrapping it in tissue paper. "Your grandmother served with honor," she'd said as she handed it to me. "This jacket has seen much courage." I decided to surprise Celeste by bringing it to Mabel's diner, the scene of my terrible mistake. Maybe if I returned it in the same place, where I'd hurt her, it would feel like coming full circle. She'd been barely speaking to me for 3 days, and I was desperate to make things right. When I called to ask if she'd meet me for lunch, her voice was hesitant. "Riley, I'm not sure I'm ready to go back there yet. Please, Grandma, I have something for you. Something important." She agreed, but I could hear the reluctance in her voice. When she walked into Mabel's 20 minutes later, she looked smaller somehow, wearing a plain blue cardigan that made her seem fragile and unfamiliar. We sat in our usual booth, the same one where everything had gone wrong. I had the wrapped jacket beside me, but I was waiting for the right moment. We ordered coffee and made awkward small talk about the weather and her roses. Then the bell above the door chimed and everything changed. A man in military dress uniform walked in. He was maybe mid-40s, with silver threading through his dark hair and the confident bearing that comes from years of command. His uniform was immaculate, ribbons and insignia indicating serious rank and service. He scanned the diner, probably looking for a table, but his eyes stopped on our booth. More specifically, they stopped on the tissue-wrapped package next to me. "Excuse me," he said, approaching our table. I couldn't help but notice that wrapping. "Are you carrying a military uniform?" I felt Celeste stiffen beside me. "Yes, sir. It's my grandmother's jacket." His attention shifted to Celeste, and something in his expression changed. "Ma'am, would you mind if I asked what kind of jacket?" Before I could answer, Celeste spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's nothing special, just an old military jacket." But I was done letting her diminish herself. I carefully unwrapped the jacket and held it up so he could see it clearly. The man's reaction was immediate and dramatic. His eyes went wide as he took in the specific patches, the medical corps insignia, and something else on the sleeve that I'd never noticed before. Faded lettering that read, Morrison C. "My God," he breathed. "Ma'am, is this your jacket?" Celeste nodded slowly, her hands trembling in her lap. The officer stepped closer, his voice dropping with reverence. "You're Sergeant First Class Celeste Morrison, 23rd Medical Battalion." The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Celeste's face had gone completely white. "How do you know that?" she whispered. "Because, Sergeant Morrison, your call sign was Echo 7 Charlie. You were stationed at Firebase Delta in 1971. His voice grew stronger, filled with emotion. "You saved 37 lives during the Tet Offensive, including my father's. Staff Sergeant James Thorne, Alpha Company." I watched my grandmother's face transform. 50 years of carefully constructed walls began crumbling as she stared at this stranger who somehow knew her story. "Your father," she said softly. "Jimmy Thorne. He had a picture of his baby boy in his wallet. He showed it to everyone in the medical tent." Commander Thorne's eyes filled with tears. "That was me. He never stopped talking about the medic who ran into enemy fire 3 times to pull wounded soldiers to safety. The medic who refused to leave anyone behind. In one fluid motion, Commander Thorne straightened to attention and rendered a perfect military salute. "Sergeant Morrison, it is an honor to finally meet you. On behalf of the men you saved, the families you kept together, and a grateful nation that never properly thanked you, I salute your service." The entire diner had gone silent. Every person in that room was watching as my 78-year-old grandmother slowly stood up, her back straightening with decades of forgotten military bearing, and returned that salute with precision that took my breath away. "Thank you, Commander," she said, her voice steady and strong for the first time in days. "It was my honor to serve." For the first time in 50 years, Celeste Morrison was being recognized for who she truly was. Not the town's mysterious old woman, but a decorated war hero who had saved lives and served her country with extraordinary courage. And I finally understood why that jacket meant everything to her. Commander Thorne stayed for 2 hours that afternoon, sharing stories about his father and asking Celeste about her experiences in Vietnam. For the first time since I'd known her, my grandmother talked openly about her past. Her voice grew stronger with each story, as if 50 years of silence were finally breaking free. "The hardest part wasn't the combat," she told him, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "It was coming home to a country that didn't want to acknowledge what we'd done over there. Especially not from a woman." "Ma'am, the military has changed significantly since then," Commander Thorne said. "Female combat medics are recognized and honored today. What you did was groundbreaking." After he left, promising to put Celeste in touch with other Vietnam veterans in the area, we sat in comfortable silence for the first time in days. The restored jacket lay folded between us on the table. "I owe you an apology," I said finally. "I thought I understood what that jacket meant to you, but I was completely wrong." Celeste reached across and took my hand. "You were trying to help, sweetheart. I know that. But this jacket isn't about living in the past. It's about honoring the most important thing I've ever done with my life. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why didn't you tell Mom or me?" She sighed, looking out the diner window at the quiet street. "When I came home in 1972, people weren't ready to hear about women in combat. The few times I mentioned my service, people either didn't believe me or they'd change the subject. So I learned to keep quiet. But you moved to Millfield in 1975. You could have started fresh, told people the truth. By then, the habit of silence was too strong. And honestly, I was tired of defending something that should have been respected without question. It was easier to just blend in, be the quiet woman who minded her own business. We drove home together, and for the first time since my arrival, Celeste put on her jacket without any defensiveness. She wore it like what it was, a uniform she'd earned the right to wear. That evening, she led me to her bedroom and opened her closet. In the back, behind her everyday clothes, was a small wooden box I'd never seen before. "I want to show you something," she said, lifting the lid. Inside were her military commendations, a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, photos of her with other medics and soldiers, letters from commanding officers praising her bravery and skill, an entire hidden history of heroism and service. "Riley, I need you to understand something," she said, holding up the Bronze Star. "That jacket isn't just fabric to me. It's proof that I mattered, that I made a difference when it counted most." I picked up one of the photos, a young woman in military fatigues, confident and strong, with Celeste's eyes, but none of the guardedness I'd always known. "You were incredible, Grandma. You are incredible. I was just doing my job, but it was the most important job of my life." Over the next few weeks, something beautiful happened. Word spread through Millfield about what had occurred at Mabel's diner. People who had whispered about crazy old Celeste for decades suddenly saw her differently. The VFW Post invited her to their monthly meetings. The high school asked her to speak to students about veterans' experiences. The local newspaper wanted to write a feature story about her service. For the first time in 50 years, my grandmother was being seen for who she truly was. "You know what I've learned this summer?" I told her one evening as we sat on the front porch, both of us wearing light jackets against the cooling air. "What's that, sweetheart?" "That sometimes what looks like someone stuck in the past is actually someone protecting the most precious part of their future." Celeste smiled, adjusting the sleeves of her olive green jacket with pride instead of defensiveness. "And I've learned," she said, "that it's never too late to tell your story. Sometimes you just need the right person to listen." We sat together in comfortable silence, watching fireflies dance across her garden. Two women, two generations finally understanding each other. And between us, that jacket, no longer a burden or a mystery, but exactly what it had always been. A symbol of service, sacrifice, and quiet heroism that deserved to be honored. Some stories are worth waiting 50 years to tell.